And I'm going to be talking about gods and religions in tabletop gaming. Now, the first thing to discuss is the nature of the gods. This is really important if you're planning your world from the top down. It can be somewhat important if you're planning the world from the bottom up too, just so that you don't get into any weird business with a situation that doesn't make sense. The first point you might want to consider about the gods is whether you want them to have once been human or mortal. In Ehumerism, the gods were once mortal kings, and mythology built up around them. They're not really divine, people just think they are. This is an interesting one because it has implications for the falseness of religion. It has implications in your world. Apotheosis is another approach. Unlike Ehumerism, where the gods were mortal men who lived and became legendary figures, under apotheosis, the gods really do ascend to divinity after their death, or perhaps during their lifetime if they're whisked away. This has an interesting thing because it forces you to think about, are all gods once mortal? Are specific gods raised up? Are there a set of gods who weren't raised from mortality? All of these have interesting implications for your world. Another possibility is to use sufficiently advanced aliens or precursors as your world's gods. Both of these are really fun, but for some people, mixing that up with fantasy doesn't always appeal to them, and I can understand that. Another thing to consider is whether your gods are active or more inactive. If your gods are active, they might be more Homeric, kind of mythological gods. Like the Greek gods, they, you know, come down to earth and cavort with women and give birth to kings and all this stuff. This sort of god is very fun to write mythology for, but it comes with interesting implications of why do the gods not interfere more with the world? If they do come around, why don't they? You could go with the sort of Greek approach and just have the gods be jerks, and that's why they don't help or hurt nearly as often as other possibilities. But it's something to think about. You could also have miracles or thaumaturgy being the primary way the gods are active. They can only interact by suspending physical laws or changing things slightly. And you could have a variety of reasons why this is. Perhaps they are essentially Homeric gods, but there's some sort of council of gods, and if one deity interferes, another will, and so most gods try to keep out of direct confrontations. There's lots of different reasons why the gods might use miracles or thaumaturgy and never appear in person. Another possibility, of course, is that the gods are inactive. You could have gods like in Epicureanism, where the gods are blissful beings that are so above humanity that they barely even notice our existence. They don't care, and thus they don't intervene. You could have gods like in deism, where some creative force created the world and then just let it run. And you could do that as a polytheistic deism or a monotheistic deism. You could have dead, sealed, or missing gods. This last one is very fun to play around with. There's lots of different things you can do with it. Elder Scrolls has its 9 divines actually as dead gods, at least the 8 divines are. They died when the world was created, and they are basically the foundation of the world. You could have something like that. Eberron has a similar approach to its gods. Granted, Eberron is much more ambiguous about the truth of its gods.
Moving on.
Then you can start thinking about making a pantheon. And here I have a little exercise I call the 5-minute Pantheon. It's just a way to get you started. You're not going to be creating something super unique, but it's a way to begin thinking about what kind of gods exist in your setting. So, one way to make a 5-minute Pantheon is just have one god. This is, of course, the most trivial way to do it, but there's a lot of different things you can do with this. Is your god good or evil? Is it like some Hindu sects where it has many aspects that it manifests as essentially lots of gods, but it's really only one god underlying everything? There's lots of little things you can do with this. It's a pretty versatile thing. You can have a duality or trio of gods. So things like good versus evil, or law versus chaos, with perhaps a neutral component. You could do something like Gnosticism, where matter and spirit are opposed. You could do something like Norse mythology, where fire and ice are an initial duality. All of these are interesting to explore. Another possibility is to do something with groups. Famous groups are things like the four elements, zodiacs, the seven classical planets, or the tarot cards. There's lots of different things you could draw inspiration from. Id, ego, superego. All of these make for interesting gods, but you have to do a lot with them to make them stand out from other people who do similar things. But if you want to, you can play around. You can either be faithful and rely on the fact that people will recognize the elements that you're building off of, or you could do something to subvert people's expectations. There's lots of things. Another possibility is to pull something from tabletop gaming itself. D&D's 9 alignments. You could make one god for each alignment and make them defined by that alignment. You could do something with 4E's 5 alignments. You could do something with classes as divine archetypes. The fighter could be a war god. The wizard could be a god of knowledge or something. Or you could use domains as gods. 5e is a little better for this, it only has 8 domains compared to like 3.5's 20 plus something domains. But it's a great starting point, you know? It covers most of the common bases, and yeah, having domains as gods is a pretty good option to look into. Another point to consider, religious diversity. And the obvious point to talk about here would be how many religions in your world. But before that, I would even talk about diversity within religions. So of course you can have different sects and heresies, or you could have religions that don't even care what people think. A lot of ancient religions were like this. Greek paganism was united basically by the civil rituals that people participated in. But people could believe whatever they want. A philosopher might believe that there was one god and that the Greek myths were all false. A philosopher might believe that, like Epicureanism, that the gods existed in some far-off place and never interacted with mortals. But because Greek religion didn't care about belief, it cared about practice, none of that mattered. There's lots of different things you can do with this. It would be really cool to have a world in which everyone participates in some common civic ritual, but there's a huge diversity of belief. The upper class versus the lower class might believe different things, and they're all united by this common faith. You could do something with diversity of religions. So how many religions do you have in your world? What religious families do you have? I tend to think having at least 3 religions is good because you can explore a lot of different ideas in just that small amount of ground. You could have a religion similar to Christianity, a sort of monotheistic, you know, big church sort of thing, and then you could have a philosophical religion, and then you could have, I don't know, a dualistic religion like Zoroastrianism. And with just those 3 religions, now you have an interesting conflict for your world. What does your pseudo-Christian religion think of the pseudo-Zoroastrian religion? What does the pseudo-philosophical religion think of the pseudo-Christian religion? It's an interesting interaction, and it's better, I think, than just having, you know, 1 or 2 religions that you're cognizant of. And the other thing to consider is, how do your religions view each other? Other religions is a very important thing in how religions conceive of themselves. So for exclusivist religions, you might have patron gods or something, gods that only care about a particular group that they have patronage over. People wouldn't think that other groups didn't have real gods, just that those gods were their patrons, as their patrons are their own. You could have something like one true religion. You could play around with this. You could have a bunch of false religions and have that be a major plot point. Either have your players come from the one true religion, or have them come from one of these false religions, and deal with the interactions that come out of that. You could also do something where the one religion has stamped out all opposition, and now there's only it, and you could do it either as an oppressive thing or a utopian thing. Both are interesting ideas to explore. Another possibility is pandemonium. This requires a little bit of explanation, but the quick version is basically when two religions decide on two different groups of gods, but both recognize both sets of gods. The classic example is Indian and Iranian religions. In Indian religions, divas are good and asuras are evil, but in Iranian religions, ahuras are good and devas are evil. So you have this basic, each group demonizes the other group's good gods and angelizes, I don't know, a different set of good gods. It's all an interesting possibility. Pandemonium could be used to explore something like the Greek gods versus the Titans, but instead of making the Titans evil, just make them another group of gods that some people worship and others people think are basically like demons. You could also have inclusive religions. Interpretatio Graeca was something that the ancient Greeks practiced, where they believed that the barbarians worshipped the Greek gods just under different names. So do something like that. Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls series in general, does this. Every culture worships either the Aedra or the Daedra. They just assign different names to the different gods in the Pantheon. Perennial philosophy is an interesting thing. It's the idea that religion is like a mountain with one peak that has many paths up it. In a world that you develop, you can play with how to make that make sense. How can every religion have a small part of the truth within it? How can every religion be a valid path to salvation or whatever is important in your world? Perennial philosophy is a great thing to deal with, and I think it would be fun to look into how can a pagan religion type thing that doesn't care about salvation be just as true or have some truth in it, just like some religion in your world that only believes in one all-pervading divine that exists within everything. It's an interesting perspective to explore. And then, of course, polymorphic monotheism, what I talked about a little earlier with Hinduism, having one god that has many forms, polymorphic. So yeah, the schema of Prothero is actually a great thing to look into. He's a religious scholar, and his approach to religion is that every religion has these four features. They identify a problem with the world, they have a goal or a solution to that problem, some sort of technique to achieve that goal, and an exemplar. Now, to explain this, say Buddhism. The problem is suffering, the solution is nirvana, the technique is the Noble Eightfold Path, and the exemplar is Buddha himself. And you can play around with this. A religion will feel real if you think about these four things for it. If you just make every religion just, okay, there's one god from the Pantheon that is worshipped by this religion, and it's shaped by just what kind of god it is, but otherwise there's not much difference, your religions will feel kind of shallow. But if you explore having them identify some sort of fundamental metaphysical problem with the world, and a solution and some techniques, and have an exemplar, they will begin to feel more like real-world religions. Another thing that is useful is the Santa template. The Santa template originated as a way to point out that if you were trying to reconstruct modern 21st century Christmas from just, two journals about Christmas and one picture of a living room around December, you would have a very hard time reconstructing Christmas. And that's almost the same situation we're in when we deal with ancient texts about certain gods. We have lots of stuff about the Greek and Roman religions, but very little about some other European religions. And so we're in a situation where if you wanted to hypothetically reconstruct a European religion that wasn't Greek or Roman, you'd have a tough time often. We deal with the fact that often things weren't written down until after Christianity, etc., etc. The point of the Santa template is just there's lots of things that you need to make something feel like Christmas. That is to say, something, all the little elements that go in, songs, specific foods, particular decorations for your room, actions that people do, rituals that people perform, stuff like that. And so all of those feed into the importance of what you need to do. And so you can see here, make your religion have sacred images, have holy days, have numerous very specific rites and rituals. The problem with this, of course, is that it takes time. It's a sort of nuance that you can't fake. But once you add this nuance, I think your world will be that much richer for the inclusion of these things. If you think about even half of this list, your religions in game will feel much more deep and true. That verisimilitude will be there than if you just ignore it and just play with a thin veneer of I guess the gods exist sort of thing. Well, that's sort of all I had. Oh yeah, a few more. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, please like, comment, or subscribe.